Okay, everyone, welcome back to the Orbis Sentry Report. We're going to continue where we left off last time. I hope you're finding this conversation enlightening, informative, and that you will find it helpful in your walk with Christ as we move forward with discussing the things that are having such a dramatic impact on all of us and the world around us. So we will now proceed.
The next event, which this will be the last event on our history of how we, no, it won't be. We just hit Paganicon. We have two more. The Dayton Dialogue. Dayton Dialogue.
And this is where things gel for what we're doing now. Yes.
That's right. At the Dayton Dialogue. Now, we were talking, okay, first of all, what was the Dayton Dialogue? Dayton Dialogue was a parallel event to a meeting of the NATO Parliament, right?
Right.
And how often does the NATO Parliament meet?
Roughly every 6 months. Most people don't realize that NATO actually has a parliamentary function. We send ambassadors to NATO. We actually have appointed diplomatic staff that is attached to NATO. We do that also with the OSCE. We have diplomats we send to the OSCE as well, which as a collective security body is actually larger than NATO and has a different mandate than NATO. So we send off our diplomats to these security forums, these international security forums, these international security architectures. And so every 6 months or so, NATO has a parliament. And the spring parliament happened to be in Dayton, Ohio. And this year, NATO did something a little different. They also offered a parallel forum for the public to attend. And so you can literally rub shoulders with diplomats, intelligence officials, military officials. I mean, we had heads of state who visited us in the forum.
That's right.
This was high-end stuff. And we were allowed to have close quarter conversations after every one of the sessions. We were all mingling in the hallways. We had conversations with people who were involved in operations, people who are involved in the military side, people involved in the academic side, people involved in the diplomacy side of NATO, because it was a full-on NATO event. And that's what we were there for. Again, to do that research, to try to understand the trends of our time, because it affects everything, including security, and to see what we could learn. And you and I attended, and our friend Stephanie came, I think on day 2 or 3, she came with us. She was our host as well, people we stayed with in Dayton. And something clicked there. We were sitting, we're sitting there, and we drew something on wrote something on, you wrote something on a piece of paper.
I've got it right here. It's probably, is that reading backwards? The words are backwards, aren't they?
It's small on my screen, so I can't really tell, but I'll let you read it out loud.
Yeah. So, and the first one is mission statement to provide actionable intelligence on the direction of global trends and the challenge to the Christian community for churches, seminaries, mission organizations, and Christian institutions. And of course, we've modified that a little bit from that time, but that was just kind of the initial, this is what we think is going to happen, what we're doing. And now, how would you link something like Paganicon and Burning Man to meeting of NATO Parliament in the parallel forum? Because there's a way that I would link it, but I'd be interested to hear how you would link those, just to show that they're on the same spectrum.
Yeah, for sure. So with something with a good example, Paganicon, it is strictly pagan. It is pagan in the large P sense of the word. And it is completely built around a religious context.
Yes.
Burning Man brings elements of that in, but it's not necessarily pagan in any large P sense of the word, where it self-identifies. The Wiccan community, the Druid community, all self-identify as pagan. Big P, capital P, pagan. That's their identity. Burning Man is not. It's like you could almost call it a middle cap size P for pagan. Yes, the pagan elements are all there. It has a pagan outlook, but it's already blending within itself all kinds of other elements that goes beyond just simply the purely religious. In fact, now we're seeing the religious or the belief converging with social issues, converging with security issues, converging with technology, converging with governance. All of a sudden, it's all percolating. This is one of the things that I find Burning Man so interesting. And in fact, I kind of kicked myself. I haven't been going for the past 15 years, and I should have. Somebody should have, because you're seeing this blending of belief and practice come together. And then all of a sudden, you step it one step further and you go to a NATO event or a United Nations event, and you're going, well, I don't see the belief in play, not the way we would at Paganicon.
Right.
But we already now see the worldview impacting decisions, impacting their positions, and they are now taking approaches to this at a policy level, whereas the pagans were taking it from a ritualistic perspective. When you go to a UN event, oh, it's not ritualism anymore, it's policy.
That's right.
It's climate change, it's biodiversity, or in the case of NATO, it's collective, a type of collective salvation around our joint endeavors.
That's right.
And it's not that it's necessarily, especially let's say we work together, that we're not saying that every time we work together it's a bad thing.
Right.
We always work together. The difference being this: we are working together with in all these different cases, and NATO's included. We work together with this sense that our vision of the world is what has to be pressed forward. Now, that said, the opposition in terms of geopolitical issues, Russia, China, or the BRICS organization, they too have a vision of what the world should look like. And now, so we have competing visions in this cult of global empire, because it's not homogenous. It's not homogenous, but underlying all of these layers, you still end up coming back to belief and this convergence of politics, because that's the policy that comes forward from your worldview and your way of discovering knowledge.
That's so interesting. That, see, when you look at it from that perspective, that's how it shows how they are all connected, and it really does come like they're all on the same epistemological kind of tier, that goes from this empirical view of the world then down to a metaphysical oneist worldview that then moves into a naturalistic based set of ethics that then there's a philosophy that's born out of that, which kind of informs the religious base, and then that's what informs the ethics and then the politics and the policy. And they're at different places on that kind of vertical spectrum, or there's actually a horizontal spectrum. And I've got two diagrams. I'm not going to show them this time. At future podcasts, I got two diagrams that kind of show what these things are. But it's really indicative that they are connected. And what you said about these are competing ideas in in determining who's going to become dominant in the cult of global empire. I think that's so important. That's really what the Christian church was right in the middle of, right when it was born. Why God established Christianity at that point in time in the Roman Empire. That Rome had transitioned away from being a republic to being an empire. Jesus was born when the first Roman emperor, Caesar Augustus, and it was right at that transition between the first and the second Roman emperor. And then over the next few decades, as God transitioned working with humanity from where he had been working with humanity with the Jews as his priestly race, he transitioned that to working with people from all races, but people who have been redeemed by the blood of Christ. And that's where the church found itself, right in the middle of that. And they were surrounded by, as Augustine described, this empire that had such an insatiable lust for power. That's the way Augustine described it. And as he described it that way, that was the environment that the church had to learn how to operate in, how to grow in, and how to survive in. And it did that for the next, 400 years. I think is like the last persecution of Christians was 303 to 311 AD. And then that was the Diocletian persecution. Constantine won the Battle of Milvan Bridge in 312 AD. In 313 AD, they passed the Edict of Milan, which made Christianity legal, which is no longer a forbidden religion. It was kind of like an edict of tolerance. And then 325 AD, it had the Council of Nicaea. 380 AD, they passed the Edict of Thessalonica, which made Christianity the official state religion. And so then I write in 386 AD, then the official state of the Roman Empire was going through some severe problems, and they were sacked by the Visigoths in 410 AD. Augustine had already become a Christian, and so he wrote the book City of God shortly after the Visigoths sacked Rome, first time in 1,000 years that Rome had been sacked by a foreign power. And it was in those 3 centuries that the church, laid its foundations for where it would be over the next several centuries, over the next millennia and a half. So it's a fascinating thing, because we're at this, where we are right now is we're at another major transition point in where the world is going. And it's a transition in epistemology. It's a transition in fundamental worldview that governs all society. And it's a transition in which philosophy, which worldview, which idea is going to become the dominant thought, the leading thought in the cult of global empire. But regardless of which idea it is, the whole world is still going for becoming a cult of global empire, regardless of which one ends up dominating. That's so interesting where that comes from.
Yeah.
So
and so that lands on what we all of a sudden started to see together at the NATO Forum.
That's
and at that point we realized, we need to put our heads together and come up with a group, an organization, a platform where we can work through these issues, talk about these issues, begin to educate the church as we cooperate in terms of the research, in terms of communicating this message. And I'm looking forward to the conversations we're going to have as we bring in guests who share the same interest and the same excitement about trying to understand the world so that we can be ambassadors in it and listen to some of their stories. So I'm really excited about that. So, I mean, we realized that there needs to be a concentrated focus on taking this beyond just simply, one guy running off here, one guy running off there, one lady running off to a different event. Hey, let's create a network. Let's create an organization. Let's build something that we can have some energy behind and have it faith-based and be able to use this to educate the church, educate the Christian community, and do intel along the way, because somebody's got to go and do it.
That's right. Yep. It's amazing and it's exciting. All right. Okay, so our last the last event in our history. So we decided to form Orbis Sentry at the NATO Forum, and we could see this was something that God was doing. It became very clear. It was shortly after that I resigned from our mission. We left on good terms with them, and we got ready to go to Burning Man again in 2025.
Yep.
And
it was a ride.
It was incredible. It was amazing to see what God was doing. And if I could summarize it, what I would say is conversation after conversation after conversation, where we just go up and talk to people and just share life with them, see how they're doing, and the conversation would eventually turn to Christ, because he's life, he's hope. And in every single case when it did, at least from my perspective, at the end of the conversation, I would get, thank you for talking to me about that. That was so helpful. Or thank you for talking to me about that. I've never heard it like that before, or something to that effect. Or in one case, there was just kind of a sense of awe. Wow, I didn't expect that.
Yeah.
But at no point did we experience any sense of hostility.
Right. We did experience not hostility, angst. And that was Sunday morning, where we had somebody show up for our Sunday morning Bible study, and he was speaking on LSD. And you bring this up in your Substack. You've got a couple of postings on what happened there. And this gentleman, now faced with the choice of following Christ or following self, runs out of our camp wearing just a bathrobe and boxers.
Yeah.
And he runs out of our camp clutching a cross given to him by Brian. And I can't remember who gave him the Bible. We do give out Bibles when we know that here's his opportunity. He gave him a Bible. He's clutching a Bible in one hand, clutching a cross in the other. And he is yelling and he's running. And George, the picture is still seared in my mind. It was almost like a cartoon. The dust pounding behind him as his feet is just pounding pounding the desert floor, and holding up a cross in one hand, holding up a Bible in the other, going, "I can't accept Jesus. There's girls," and off he goes. And you can only hope and pray that as he was coming down from his high, holding a Bible in one hand and holding the cross in the other, that he will maybe have made the right choice, because it was so powerfully presented as he was struggling so deeply with this angst between self or savior.
Yeah, that's right. That is so true. And like the cartoonish aspect of it and the irony of it is something that kind of makes us kind of chuckle at it, but at the same time, it's not really a chuckling matter, because this is
right.
We're talking. And so I've thought about that a number of times, and I thought about where he was, and we just pray that he will at some point figure it out. But I realized one of the effects, I think, some people say, like you sent me a copy of that study that they did where they had all these pastors take ayahuasca or something. I think it was ayahuasca, and talk about
psilocybin.
Psilocybin.
Yes. Yeah.
And they talked about how it enhanced their spirituality, and that there may be some truth to that, but of course that study was completely stacked in advance, so that it would come out with what they wanted it to come out with. But I think one of the things that whole incident illustrated to me is, the temptations of the flesh. And when we talk about the flesh, we're not just talking about the sensuality of something like indulging in sex or something like that, but it's just the sensual mind, the desire to be master of my own fate, captain of my own soul, that whole, what I am and who I am and how I trying to identify, in my humanity and myself, trying to make some formulation of who I am. That the temptation is already so strong in ourselves to follow that impulse. You enhance that with psychedelic drugs or with cocaine or any of the other drugs. There's no chance. There's no chance that, there is a chance. Jesus can overrule that, and he might do that from time to time. But to imagine that somehow taking the psychedelic drugs is going to help you spiritually, I think that is a huge, huge danger.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And we saw that play out in real time, right in front of us, right in our camp, as this gentleman was having that choice put before him, Jesus or yourself. And he made that choice very clear, but under much angst, because he was struggling with that.
Yes,
he was seriously struggling with that. All of that said, none of this is difficult in the sense of you don't have to take courses, and you don't have to run off to seminary to learn everything. We don't have the answers for everything. All we can do is put our feet out there and walk into the places where God has opened those doors. And I tell the class that I teach at Miller College, you don't have to come to Burning Man. You have it all around you.
That's
In
right.
fact, that's actually the point. You have it all around you. It's already in your living. And you've probably have adopted elements of this without even knowing it.
Yeah, really true. Really true.
Yep.
So important. Okay, so gosh, we're talk about our workshop, Stories of the Supernatural, but we're pushing the limits of time significantly. So I will defer that, because we already have published those recordings on the podcast and earlier episodes, even though this is kind of the first inaugural podcast, but it's the same podcast stream. So we have both episodes of Stories of the Supernatural. I would encourage anyone that's listening to this to go and listen to that, because we had an incredible response when we started talking about the spiritual realm, the unseen realm, and what the Bible says about the unseen realm at our own workshop, and people had come to it and just to see what God is doing. That was an amazing experience. That was one of the blessings. We're going to probably try and do more of those kind of things in future when we go to Burning Man in the future. We've got our pavilion ready. We figured out the practical side, how to set up the pavilion and how to ratchet it down with very, very deep ties into the playa, and so that it can withstand 40-mile-per-hour winds, because it did that first night, 40-mile-per-hour winds.
That's right. Yep.
Want to thank you all for listening. This is the end of this segment. We're going to pause this our podcast so we can break it up into more manageable chunks so that you can listen and watch. And we'll be back with the next segment very soon.